Have you ever wondered why an entire generation was taught they could become anything, only to grow up feeling like they were failing at life? Millennials, born roughly between 1981 and 1996, were raised on a powerful promise. If they studied hard, worked harder, followed the rules, and believed in themselves, they would earn a stable job, a home, a family, and a future they could trust. But when they reached adulthood, the world waiting for them looked completely different. College became painfully expensive, homes moved further out of reach, stable careers slowly disappeared. Social media turned ordinary life into a performance that never ends. And somehow, society still looks at them and asks, "Why are you so anxious?" In this video, Thalvin Psychology explores the hidden psychology of millennials. And if you enjoy deep insights into human behavior, subscribe for more thoughtful psychology videos. Millennials came of age carrying one of the most comforting messages a child can hear. They were told they were special, that effort would open doors, and that confidence could turn almost any dream into a plan. For many parents, this was not careless parenting. It came from love, optimism, and the self-esteem movement of the 1980s and 1990s. The problem was not teaching children to believe in themselves. The problem was preparing them for a world that seemed far fairer than it actually was. When millennials became adults, belief alone could not defeat student debt, housing prices, recessions, or unstable work. They learned to dream big, but nobody warned them the rules could change as they entered the game. This created a quiet, psychological conflict inside many millennials. On one side, they were raised to believe they had potential, talent, and a future waiting for them. On the other side, real life kept sending the opposite message. We're not earning enough. They were not buying homes. They were not reaching the milestones that once defined adulthood. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the painful tension between what a person believes and what reality seems to prove. For millennials, that tension became deeply personal. If you were never promised much, failure may hurt less. But when your childhood was built around the idea that you were meant to succeed, struggle feels like an identity crisis. They did not just lose stability, they lost the story they once believed about themselves. End quote. This is why millennials are often misunderstood. From the outside, they can look self-focused, overly expressive, or too concerned with personal identity. Some people call them narcissistic because they grew up being told to believe in themselves and later learned to build a public image online. But external confidence is not always real confidence. Sometimes it is armor. A person can post beautiful photos, write an impressive bio, update LinkedIn with every achievement, and still feel quietly behind in life. They may look successful while feeling anxious. They may seem independent while feeling lost. They may appear self-obsessed when they are actually trying to prove they are okay. Millennials may look like a generation that loves itself too much, but often, they are just trying to convince themselves they are not falling apart. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. For many millennials, adulthood did not begin with freedom, possibility, or confidence. It began with a collapsing economy. They graduated into a weak job market where entry-level positions were scarce, wages were low, competition was intense, and experience was demanded before anyone had a chance to gain it. Many had done exactly what they were told to do. They studied. They went to college. They took on debt. They believed a degree would open the door to stability. But when they stepped through that door, the floor was missing. The crisis did not only take away jobs, it took away trust. A generation that thought it had followed the rules began to wonder whether the rules had ever been real. At the same time, social media arrived right as millennials were forming their adult identities. They were not born into it the way Gen Z was. They met Facebook, Instagram, and online self-presentation while they were learning who they were supposed to become. That timing matters. Before this, people mostly had to live their lives. Millennials had to live their lives and also prove that life looked good from the outside. Careers became something to display. Relationships became something to announce. Vacations, bodies, weddings, apartments, friendships, and achievements all became part of a public performance. Every scroll created another comparison. Every post became quiet evidence that someone else was moving faster. So millennials did not just ask, "Am I happy?" They also had to ask, "Does my life look happy enough on a screen?" This is why so many traditional milestones arrived late for millennials, or never arrived at all. Marriage, home ownership, children, and stable careers did not disappear from their desires. For many, they simply became harder to reach. It was not always that millennials rejected adulthood. Often, adulthood became too expensive to enter. And that creates a strange emotional wound. When society still measures maturity by houses, families, savings, and career stability, anyone who lacks those things can feel unfinished. A person can be 35 or 40 and still feel like they are waiting for real life to begin. They are aging, paying bills, working hard, and carrying responsibility, but the promised version of adulthood still feels out of reach. That is one of the deepest pains of this generation. Millennials were also raised with a simple formula: study hard, go to college, get a job, work your way up, and life will eventually become stable. For a long time, that formula sounded reasonable. But by the time many millennials followed it, the numbers had changed. Tuition was higher, student debt was heavier, jobs were less secure, wages often failed to keep up with the cost of living. This was more than disappointment. It felt like the collapse of a social contract. When someone fails because they never tried, self-blame is simple. But when they do everything they were taught and still struggle, confusion takes over. Millennials did not lose faith in hard work. They lost faith in the promise that hard work would always be rewarded fairly. This also explains why millennials are often accused of being disloyal at work. They are criticized for job hopping, questioning managers, and refusing to stay with one company for decades. But the workplace changed before they did. Pensions disappeared. Full-time roles became temporary contracts. Benefits became weaker. Layoffs became a normal business strategy. Loyalty only makes sense when it moves in both directions. If companies no longer offer stability, protection, or a believable future, then workers adapt. For millennials, changing jobs is not always rebellion. Sometimes it is survival. They did not destroy workplace loyalty. They stopped trusting a system that had already stopped being loyal to them. Millennials also changed the way people talk about mental health. They help normalize therapy, anxiety, depression, trauma, burnout, and emotional boundaries in everyday conversation. That is a major cultural shift. But self-awareness does not automatically remove pain. A person can know they are burned out and still have bills to pay. They can understand their attachment style and still feel lonely. They can know they need boundaries and still be afraid of losing people. They can name their trauma and still lack the money, time, or stability to heal it. This is the paradox of millennials. They are better at identifying their wounds than many generations before them. But they are often still trapped inside the conditions that created those wounds. Millennials are not reacting to one problem. They are reacting to many problems layered on top of each other. Economic instability, student debt, unaffordable housing, unstable careers, social media pressure, climate anxiety, and an uncertain future all press on the same generation at once. So, their psychology becomes easier to understand when you look at the context. They are not simply complaining. They were handed an old map for a world that had completely changed. And when the map no longer matches the territory, people do not just feel lost. They begin to question their own ability to find the way. Millennials are not overreacting. They are having a deeply human response to a world that keeps changing the rules. The psychology of millennials cannot be explained by saying they are lazy, too sensitive, or unwilling to work hard. If we look closer, we see a generation raised with enormous expectations, pushed into adulthood during economic instability, trained to perform their lives online, and forced to delay milestones that once felt normal. Maybe millennials are not weaker than previous generations. Maybe they are simply one of the first generations to say out loud what many people before them suffered through in silence. And maybe what makes them different is not that they failed to grow up. It is that they are trying to grow up in a world where adulthood itself no longer has a clear shape. If this video helped you understand yourself or someone you know, Subscribe to Thalvin's Psychology for more deep insights into human behavior.